Thanks for staying with us here on the program. South Africans are feeling the pinch as the cost of living continues to rise. The latest Household Affordability Index shows that the price of a basic food basket has climbed from just over 3,400 Rand in 2020 to more than 5,500 Rand this year. That's an increase of 62%. As households battle to make ends meet, we're joined this morning by the program coordinator at the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, Mervyn Abrahams. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. And I mean, this is devastating, Mervyn, this increase in the basic food basket in a context where not many people have seen an increase in their income over the past 6 years from 2020.
So good morning, Michelle, and good morning to all your viewers. Exactly as you were saying, it is an issue around affordability, and of course affordability involves the prices of the most essential things we need to procure as in relation to the amount of income we have. And so when we look, for instance, at food prices, when we look, for instance, at electricity costs, which is also a major expense for household, and we look for transport costs and administered costs, meaning the cost of your water tariffs, your rates that municipalities charge, then we've seen that these prices have escalated around about the same level of about 62 to even 80% more over this period, whilst wages have remained consistently low in terms of that. And so that's caused pressure on the household budget. And it's the electricity costs, the transport costs, the administered costs that are now crowding out the amount of money that people have for food, whilst at the same time we have seen food prices increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this morning, my colleague Arabile Gumede from the AM Report went out with the 370 Rand, which is the amount in the SRD grant, the Social Relief of Distressed Rand. And he tried to see just what he could buy in terms of groceries in a store. And it wasn't much, Mervyn. It wasn't even any meat or any cleaning materials, and really just the basic vegetables. How are people meant to survive on this amount of money?
So people are not surviving. And that's the fact for the majority of South Africans. The survival strategy is to cut back on what they consume, or they lower the nutritional value, so they go for cheaper foods. But the problem is, as they go for cheaper foods, like, instead of eating beef, you now go for tripe, or instead of eating chicken, you go for chicken feet, so at least you get the flavor of the chicken in the meal. But the more they go towards chicken feet, for instance, we are seeing a corresponding increase in the cost of that, because now when demand is higher, then of course prices increase as well. So people are not actually surviving. They are living on less than is required, as well as less nutrition, and we see that very clearly when we look at our health statistics in this country.
Yeah, and just, looking at the increases in particular foods in the basket, and this is an increase for the month of July, and they might seem small to some, but these are all increases that add up when you tally the entire basket. So things like maize meal has gone up in July by 4%, cooking oil by 2%, even salt has gone up by 3%, potatoes as well, frozen chicken portions and the like. So these are marginal increases of 2 to 3%, but when you add them up, and we've got the prices here on screen for the sake of our viewers, maize meal again increasing. Okay, these increases, Mervyn, that we're showing on screen now are for the period 2020 to 2026. So the increase was from about 255 Rand to over 265 Rand. So that's over 10 Rand in an increase over a period of 6 years, so 2020 to 2026. Salt, again, as we see, has increased. If we bring up the next board there on screen, All right, we'll bring that up in just a moment. But yeah, as I say, salt is also increased by, again, a marginal increase, about 50 cents. But these are all things that add up again, Mervyn. And when we talk about the cost of living crisis, it's about how much money is coming in versus how much money is meant to keep a family of 4 going in terms of food and essentials.
Yes, exactly. And that's where the crunch is. So food prices have significantly increased. In fact, it's increased more than what most households can afford. But now when you look, for instance, Michelle, at the 8.7% increase in the electricity cost of Eskom this year, then the national minimum wage for this year increased by something like 260 rand, and an 8.7% increase in electricity on 350 kilowatts, which we track, would cost you around an increase of about 130 rand, 36 rand. So immediately with that Eskom price increase coming in, that's already taken half of the national minimum wage increase for this year. And then on top of that, we are looking, for instance, at these food price increases, without even considering, for instance, transport prices that have gone up. Taxi fares have gone up this year because of fuel price increases linked to geopolitical factors. And so households just cannot make it. So what women tell us they do is that they have to spend on transport because they have to get the worker to work. So that's critical. Then the second area that they spend is on electricity because that is essential for cooking, preserving food. They can buy in bulk, they can cut back a little bit, but for that they need electricity. And the third area they have to spend money on is on debt servicing because money runs out midway through the month, and then they are dependent on their store cards, they are dependent on other sources of debt. And only then do they identify food. And so when you see that all these other 3 prices increase, then of course it crowds out what you need for food. So as an example, for instance, when you take a national minimum wage, you subtract transport, you subtract 350 kilowatts of electricity, then from a 5,000 rand national minimum wage, you are actually left over with 2,000. And the cost of our basket is 5,000. So households are just not able to make it. They can't stretch their household budget across all these absolutely essential costs. And therein lies the affordability crisis that South Africa has been dealing with for the past 10 or 20 years. We just don't seem to come out of it because our wages and the incomes coming into our homes are not consistent with the inflation on electricity or the inflation on administered prices or the inflation on food prices. Yeah. And this is not, for instance, talking about small town South Africa, Michelle. I mean, when we look at small town South Africa, this comes very clearly through our July Household Affordability Index. Then small town South Africa is spending so much more on food. So the average cost of our basket is 5,530. But when you look at a small town like Springbok, then the average cost of that basket in Springbok is 6,109. When you look at Tuba, it's 5,649 rand. So small town South Africa feels this affordability crisis even more so than does those in the major metropolitan cities like Johannesburg, eThekwini, or Cape Town.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Mervyn, and I'm glad you brought up the issue of transport and electricity as well, because the national minimum wage is meant to support, in most cases, particularly for black families, it will support a family of 4, right? And in that aspect, we haven't even factored in, you've talked about transport and electricity. but we haven't even factored in an issue like school fees.
Yes, we don't, because this just doesn't stretch. It doesn't stretch far enough. And because it doesn't stretch far enough, certain costs have to be excluded. And when we talk about what are being excluded, or we ask women what do they exclude, then things like school fees can't be paid. And that is why having non-fee paying schools are so critical. And a service that government can actually expand on. It's also about healthcare, going to the clinics and not being able to afford basic medication. And that too is an area that government need to expand upon. So our social security network that is meant to catch people when cost of living increase beyond the level that their household budgets can afford, even that is not catching sufficiently people. And that is why we are seeing not just poverty at this level, but that also builds intergenerational poverty, because the children coming from households where they're not eating properly, where they're not getting sufficient nutrition, where they're not getting good education, where they're not getting good health, are more likely to be the children that will get trapped into this poverty cycle, because when they enter the labor force, they will enter the labor force probably as low-paid workers. And so they never had the opportunity, and they won't be able to afford the opportunity to their children. And that is why we have to really speak about cost of living, increasing the level of income coming into the homes, but also trying to keep the basic costs down to below CPI inflation level, so that households can actually manage to get out of this poverty trap.
Yeah, or else the cycle continues, Mervyn. On the issue of children and the ability of a family to feed a child a balanced diet, I mean, we've got some figures on that as well. And on average, every month to feed a child a basic, nutritious diet is just over 980 rand, so almost 1,000 rand. Again, it's out of the budget of where our basic income is at the moment.
Exactly. And when we look, for instance, at the food poverty line, then we see the food poverty line is 855 rand per person. We include children in there. And then when we look, for instance, at the social grant, the child support grant that is meant to help keep children out of poverty, that is only at 580 rand. So not even do the child support grant cover the food poverty line, let alone what it costs to feed a child a basic nutrition. And that's where the gaps in our social security network that I spoke about earlier is. At least the child support grant should be set at a level that can provide children with basic nutrition, because that would then eradicate child-level household food insecurity, but it's not even doing that. And that's why this problem of child-level poverty and childhood stunting and children not performing as well as they should perform at school, that is why that persists in the South African environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about educational outcomes as well, and the cycle of poverty continuing. There are a lot of figures that we've been talking about this morning, but of course at the end of the day there are real people being impacted by the cost of living crisis. Mervyn Abrahams, thank you for weighing in on this conversation. He's the program coordinator for the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group.